Hello. Today I'm going to install Xenserver 6.5. After that I will configure a Microsoft Windows Server 2012 R2 domain controller as a VM within the Xenserver environment. And then I'll show how to connect some other VMs into the domain. So first up, we're going to open up VMware and we'll configure a new VM. This will be the VM for the actual Xenserver itself. So we'll just mount the ISO there, and then we'll set that to Red Hat Enterprise 6.5 64-bit, just because it's close enough. And then we'll rename this so we know exactly what it is. Set that to about, give it much more space because it's a hypervisor. I usually like to set that to a single file. And up the RAM. We've got plenty of RAM in this computer, so we'll up that considerably. So it'll be running multiple VMs in the end, and 4 cores, because I've got plenty of cores to play with on this computer. You need to do that. You need to click that VT box, and there we go. We'll just continue on there, and we'll launch it. You can hit enter there, or you can just let it go. It'll go ahead and do everything. When it arrives at this detecting hardware section, it can take a considerable amount of time. You just need some patience. Nothing's gone wrong. If it's been sitting there for a while, it will eventually move on. Now we'll make our way through some of the initial configuration. Like here, we'll just set the keyboard to whatever suits us. Then it's just agree to this bit to be able to install it. as well as the next window here, except the EULA. We can go with just the default setting there for what we're doing. Local media is what we need to install from. And we don't need to verify. You can if you like, doesn't hurt. You set up a password here. This is for your root password for logging into the Linux side of things. And well, I'm using dhcp, so I don't need to set that, but you can set that if you want to do it manually, as well as this section. I'm changing the host name here. You can change it to whatever you like, doesn't really matter. Just remember what it is. Set that to whatever country you're in, and then whatever city, which I'm in Melbourne, there we go. You can set your user, manually set a time server, or just manually set it yourself, and here we're installing. It's not a very long installation, it's not too bad. You can actually set up a Xenserver pretty quickly. This just set the date and time correctly. Do try to get it as correct as you can. And we're almost there. There, done. And just hit the OK there and we'll reboot. And you will have a Xenserver ready to go. So there you go. We now have our Xenserver up and running. Now you will need to take note of the IP address there you'll see on the right hand side of the screen of the VM window, as we are now going to install the Xen Control Center, and we're going to need that IP address to be able to connect to it. So we'll just start this VM over here on the other side, because it is a Windows based program. You can get some Linux alternative versions, as Xenserver is an open source project and people do make their own support tools for it. But in this particular example, we're going to use the Citrix official version, which is only available for Windows apparently. I don't know why. I don't know why they just don't release a Linux version as well. They possibly don't need to. There's plenty of others out there that'll support it for them. So we'll run the installation package. You can just flick through with the defaults. There's no problem with that. And we'll fire it up. Then we'll add that IP address of our new Xenserver, which is the IP address there on the right hand side of the screen. So we'll pop that in that box, and we'll put in the password recreated earlier. And we're in action. So we'll make another network port there, which is an external network port, so we can have everything all talking together across our network, as opposed to the default setting. And yeah, we'll click that box there, may as well. And now we'll create a new VM. We'll mount an ISO to the VM window here, and we'll just finding, there it is, that's Windows Server 2012 R2 install disk, and we'll create a new VM. We're going to find it in the list. There it is. Rename that accordingly. I'll change that to domain controller, as this will be our domain controller, obviously. Always a good place to start. Yeah, use the VMware Players CD drive. We can just use defaults for everything else for what we're doing. Change that network card, and away it goes. It will take a moment to show up. We'll be using both those network adapters, the original and the one we created, which is fine. We'll just open that up a bit bigger so you can see it. Set this section accordingly, obviously. And we'll do a standard Windows Server install with a GUI. Accept the license agreement. Choose the bottom option and we'll just go with the defaults there for what we're doing. And away it goes installing. So, now that's installed, we'll have to set up an administrator password. So make a good decision there on what you're going to remember, then put it in. Then after that, we'll need to choose the Control Delete from up the top there. And then we'll just log in, and then we'll get started on creating our domain controller. So we need to wait for this server manager to open before we get too far. And we are going to change the name of our server. Best to do this before we get too far. Make it something that you'll recognize. Where I've put DC there for domain controller. This will involve a reboot. Now the server manager will open up again, but next we are going to adjust our IP address, because you need a fixed IP address for this next operation of creating a domain controller. It works so much better that way. Now I'm going to change the IP address of this adapter. And we'll set that to 10.10.10.1. And our DNS server, we're going to need to do that too. We should really disable the other network adapter because it's set to dhcp, but it's not going to interfere with what we're doing. There will be an alert later on to let us know that we did leave it on dhcp. But as long as we've got one of the adapters set as a fixed address, we shouldn't have any issues. Here you'll want to enable the Active Directory service there, just tick the box. And just click add feature. Make sure it's only that tick box in particular, the Active Directory domain services ticked. You can scroll down a bit further and we can tick one of the DNS services down here. Otherwise it will enable that by itself regardless. So we'll tick that. But because we've set one of the network adapters still as dhcp, we'll get an alert later on. It won't interfere with what we're doing, it's just to demonstrate that you will see that. There, just click next. Nothing to set there, so you just continue. Give it a review and then hit the install and away it goes. This does take a little bit of time. You just need some patience and it will finish. Once the installation has seemed to have finished, it will say at the top if it's completed. Just click close down the bottom here, and then we'll need to click on up the top there. You'll see there's a yellow alert next to the flag where it says manage. So you click there and you click the option to promote this server to a domain controller. You'll want to set this section to add a new forest. And give it a name. Remember, you need a .com or .something at the end for your domain name. And then hit the next button. Here you can set the particular standard protocol you want to use for your domain server, whether you want it to be backwards compatible with any earlier versions of Windows Server that you may want to add as another domain controller, for example. Otherwise, you can just leave it as a default. The rest of this screen you can leave as default. You will need to put a password in this section, so just put in a password that you'll remember. Now just ignore that DNS warning at the top. It's normal to see that. There's no bad settings you've done, you just ignore it and continue. When you arrive in this window, wait for a NetBIOS name to show up in the box there automatically, and then just continue on. You can stick with the default locations for your temp files there. There's no need to change it unless you want to do something fancy pants. And you can check over your configuration there and then continue. It will now install as per our settings. Now here you'll see some alerts. The first one's about encryption, don't worry about that. The ones further down is because we have set one of the network adapters as dhcp. As long as we've got one of them with a set IP address, we've got no issues, we can continue on. But just note, if you don't want to have that error, then make sure you got no network adapters as dhcp when you run through this process. Make sure they're all got assigned IP addresses. And away it goes. Just as it mentioned earlier, it's likely to reboot your computer during the configuration installation. And we'll log in here using the domain administrator account now instead of the local administrator account. And it's working fine. So now we're going to create a new VM. Just another server VM, but it won't be a domain controller this time. It'll just be a general file server, for example, and we'll connect that to the domain at the end. It's best to create a new VM for this because we can copy the previous VM and make that a file server instead, but domain servers don't like it if you use the same UUID when they connect, and so you're better off just creating a new VM, and you can use that new VM you've created as an image to create copies of it if you want multiple versions of it. But as long as you don't use the original VM you used to create the domain controller, it will all work nicely. Of course, there's some other ways around it, but the easiest way is just create a new one. Reinstall Windows on another one, and there's no trouble. Same again as last time, we'll create a standard server with a GUI. We just create whatever you want really, but that's what we're going to make right here. And we're going to use the same process as before just to get ourselves a working Windows Server 2012 R2. So here we'll give it a local administrator account password so that we'll be able to log into the new installation and then be able to connect it up to the domain. Okay, well, we're not going to shut down the computer just yet. We are going to install XenTools. We'll need to do this on the domain controller as well, because the networking in Xenserver works much better when you've got the XenTools installed. And we're just installing it on the domain controller now as well, while we've got the other one installing. Notice it's got that restart window behind. Ignore that. Wait till this main window itself actually tells you that to restart. See, there it is again. There's a restart window behind. Just ignore it and press on. Just wait till that progress bar is right to the end and tells you to restart. Yeah, so you use that restart now, not the other one. And there you have it. There's XenTools installed on one of the servers. And when we log into our domain controller, we should see a similar window. Now we're going to duplicate that file server VM we've set up. As you can see, it's just really simple to duplicate. You'll want to rename that probably to something else. I'll just name that as number 2. And there, XenTools is finished installing on the domain controller. Now we'll log into one of these file servers that I've set up and let's make sure I use the correct password, and then we'll attach it to the domain. Now before we attach it to the domain, we're going to give it a different computer name. Now you can just jump right in and put the domain name in the box and connect it to the domain, or you can just get the name of the computer right and then go through the whole reboot process and then join it to the domain, which is what we'll do that now. And now we'll log back into the network connection settings and we shall change the IP address. Just going to make sure we change it for the correct network adapter. So we'll put that into our 10 by 10 by 10 by whatever network. We'll call it number 2. The DNS needs to be that of the domain server. And then we'll attempt to ping the domain server. If we can't, then we've used the wrong network adapter, which, as I can see there, we've used the wrong network adapter. So we'll have to set that one back to dhcp and then use the other one instead. So we'll do that. We'll We'll make this one 10 by 10 by 10 by 3. 10.10.10.3. And now we can ping the domain controller. So we should now be able to connect to our domain. I'll just set that back to dhcp because we don't really need it for anything else really. I don't need that either. Should change that DNS back, and right, we're ready to connect. Make sure you type in here the domain name plus the .com, which will just compare on our domain server here, which should show what we need to type. That's it. We have to type it in exactly as it is on that window there. So we'll just pop that in the box here. And put in our administrator name and password that we set up earlier. And we are now connected to the domain successfully. We'll need to reboot, so we'll do that. Restart now. So now we'll try and log in using the domain administrator account instead of the local administrator account. So you specify the domain name and the / administrator, then put in your administrator password and then see if it loads. And yes, we're in. So we've successfully connected to the domain and able to log in on any computer using domain credentials. And as you can see there, our file server now shows a domain name in its system properties. And we shall prepare the second file server that we've configured. We'll need to change the name of the computer and then connect it to the domain. just like with the last one. So now we've logged into our second file server. We shall go into the system properties and we shall change the name of the server. Call it server 2, and we'll attempt to switch it to the new domain without doing a reboot in between, which should not really matter. You should be able to just do the whole lot in one big go, or separately. Choice is yours. You can see here it's not going to connect because we have not added it to the particular network. It's still on dhcp, so it's not going to see our 10.10.10 network. So we'll call it 10.10.10.4 and set the DNS to our domain controller, which is 10.10.10.1. Now, providing we have changed the IP address on the correct network adapter, we'll attempt to set the computer name and connect directly to the domain without doing a separate reboot in between once more. Enter the administrator password again, just like before. And yes, success. We'll still need to do a reboot, obviously, as it's telling us here. What I am now going to show you is how to prevent the network administrator password from having to be changed every now and then. It'll lock it in, so you won't get a warning after a certain period saying, oh, you need to change your password now. We don't want that for the domain administrator. It's a right pain in the bottom and we don't need it. You go down to users there, open the properties of that up, and there's a tick box in this tab. Password never expires. Problem solved. You can then change it whenever you want to change it, not when it wants you to change it. Though if you prefer it that way, then it's up to you. So that's it. We are done. That's how you install Xenserver 6.5 and configure a Windows 2008 R2 to main controller.